because it's a pretty bold statement. Why the adrenal saliva tests suck, and the best test to determine your hormone function. So if I think I should preface that a little bit in terms of why the adrenal saliva test as the only thing that you do to give you insight sucks, and the best test to determine your hormone function. So that gives you a little more specific idea of the adrenal saliva test is a tool, and not all tools are created equal, but all tools have some kind of function that can be helpful. And the adrenal saliva test, I found, if it's done all by itself, it's very misleading, and it's very frustrating because clients will DM me on Facebook, or future clients, or just people that want some help, and they say, hey, I did this adrenal saliva test, and can you help me here? And when I only see that, I think, no, I can't help you. I don't know anything. There's nothing going on for me to understand what's going on here. So not enough information. So I will share with you a couple of our slides so that you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But nonetheless, I feel that a lot of clients, or a lot of people that are dealing with an exhaustion and fatigue-based problem, they are looking for answers, and they are frustrated. They're being told that their tests are normal. They are told that there's no such thing as an adrenal fatigue problem. They are not being believed. And it's one of those diseases, if you will, that you look normal on the outside, but you're exhausted and frustrated and just depleted on the inside. And when you're not supported and the doctors don't believe in it, and the tests show that you're normal, quote unquote, when you get to do a saliva test, at least it's something that can give you some insight. However, now you're having me tell you that they suck. And again, they're a weak tool if they're used all by themselves. And with that being said, if you're using them with other tools, then you almost don't use the tool that's obsolete, because the other tools do the job for you. That's how I feel about adrenal saliva testing. So who is this webinar for? So this webinar is for men and women that are stuck. And when I say stuck, it means that they're not for the lack of trying. They've been on the internet, they're searching things on their own, they're in groups, they're on seminars like tonight, they're watching videos, and you don't have a lot of bandwidth to invest when you are tired and you want to be able to get as much insight as you can. So this is for you. And you know there's missing puzzle pieces. I just had a consult with someone the other day, and he told me, yeah, I know there's something being missed. I've been to a sleep coach, I've talked to a nutritionist, I've been to the doctors, and I know there's other aspects like me stressing and looking at the clock in the middle of the night, and me cutting out my carbs, and I lost a lot of weight, but I'm still not getting the answers that I'm looking for. So this is for you, because you know that there's a hidden energy reserve that needs to be tapped into. And if you've been struggling for years, or you're just feeling stuck, then this information is for you. So in the next 45 minutes, hopefully we'll go a little shorter. Last time we went a little longer, and I want to keep it right around that time frame. In the next 45 minutes, what I want to do is I want to teach you how to be able to break free of the shackles and the handcuffs that are keeping you from enjoying your family and your friends, so that you can turn back the hands of time to a more youthful and energized self. Or I want to help you understand the ground zero reasons for your exhaustion that seems so basic, yet it's elusive in the information journals, or it's buried, and the medical curriculum doesn't teach it, and the public health policies certainly don't support it. And I want you to understand that there are answers. I also want to teach you how our current healthcare model is set up to keep you sick, and it doesn't give you the ingredients that are the basics for having you to produce energy. and do that so that you don't have to spend hours searching through social media or blog posts or another YouTube video. This is a second masterclass that we're doing, and I'm consistently wanting to produce you a series, and I'd like to do a series of 10. So we'll do 10 weeks in a row. So in the 10 weeks in a row, maybe not just this class where we're going to teach you everything about how the current healthcare model is broken, but over the series, we're going to be teaching you that. And ultimately in this class, I want to teach you why I feel that the adrenal saliva index sucks and what's the best test to determine your hormone status. So hopefully by the end of this class, my goal and my promise, if you stick to the end, is a new way to think about adrenal fatigue so that you are able and empowered to create what I like to call energy on demand in 90 days or less. So that's a bold promise. And I want you to start to have some ahas when you listen to these master classes. So this is a diagram that's fairly sophisticated, but I want you to understand the HPA axis. So when we talk about the HPA axis, we talk about the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal glands. And that's been the new definition of an adrenal fatigue-based problem. However, I even go as far as saying, I don't think that's enough to give you a complete understanding of what's going on when you are tired and burnt out. Yes, your stress response system. So it's really, think about your nervous system, your senses, your smells, your sights, your touches, your feel, your sound, the centrally and peripherally, that ultimately signals to your brain what's going on in the environment. And then that signals to your endocrine system when there's a stressor to mount a response so that you can maintain balance and equilibrium and homeostasis, so that, as an example, you can increase your temperature if it's cold outside, or you can increase your heart rate if you have to walk up a flight of stairs, or you can be able to decrease your temperature if it's actually too hot. And these are basic things that your body regulates through communicating. When there's stressors, the stressors will then release neurotransmitters or excitatory chemicals and hormones so that you can fight or flight, or you can flee, or you can be able to mount a response. And that's how we're engineered. And so what I have here circled is, you'll see the stress is the main thing that stimulates your hypothalamus, your pituitary, and your adrenals. And people understand that. And when we talk about the adrenal saliva test today, the reason I'm not a fan of it is because if you look at cortisol, it's the last part, and I'm sorry I can't use my cursor, but if you look at cortisol, it's the last part of the equation. So you have stress that stimulates your hypothalamus, that's in the brain, and then that stimulates your pituitary, which is really the master gland that, or the master regulator of your endocrine glands. It secretes a hormone, and that hormone goes to the adrenals, and then the adrenals release glucocorticoids, of which cortisol is the main one. And so when we look at an adrenal saliva test, it's very, very reductionistic, meaning you'll see that the free fraction of the hormone is low or high. And when I say the free fraction of the hormone, that means when you do a saliva test, you're measuring the part that's not bound to a protein. So that's called your free fraction. And it's estimated that that amount is about 1 to 5% of the total hormone production you have for the day. So when you're measuring the free fraction, you're really only getting 1 to 5%. And as a result, you're concluding what's going on with the 95 to 99%. And you're assuming if the cortisol levels are low in the free fraction, the saliva test, then the 95 to 99% of the total amount must be low. And my biggest challenge is that very often it's not. It's not the problem. Besides which, even if it were, even let's say cortisol was low, the saliva fraction was low, and then the metabolized, how much you produced for the day was low. By you giving a protocol of raising your cortisol, whether it's adaptogenic herbs or glandulars or prednisone or hydrocortisone or licorice root, whatever it may be, it's not addressing the stress component that's causing the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenals to make the cortisol. And to me, that's playing whack-a-mole. That's filling up a glass that has a major hole in it and expecting the water to hold in there when you're not addressing the main challenge, which is the stress. And I'm going to create an argument that it goes beyond stress and it goes beyond just looking at the free fraction. And that's why I'm not a huge fan of the adrenal saliva test. So let's move to the next slide. And again, why is it not letting me move here? 1 second, we'll go back to that. All right, so let's play. So we're moving to the next slide. And again, it's not letting me do that. Gotta love these challenges when you're not able to move the slides here. So let me play that again. So now if you look at this next slide, what I have here circled, and I guess I'm gonna have to change these slides one by one now because it doesn't seem to be moving. But anyways, if you look at this next slide, what I have circled is mast cells. Instead of the stress stimulating the HPA axis, I have the mast cells stimulating the HPA axis. So what is mast, or what are mast cells? So mast cells are your immune response. And whenever you have an immune response, something that's stressing your body, again, the nervous system, the brain, and the senses, and the peripheral nervous system send signals to the brain to tell your adrenals and your other hormones, your sex hormones and your thyroid hormone, and all the different glands that are involved with mounting a stress response. To mount a stress response, you have mast cells that are now stimulating that process, not stress. And what are mast cells? Mast cells are an immune system response. So let's say you have a pathogen, or let's say you get exposed to mold, or let's say that there is EMFs in the environment, or let's say that your body is not passing oxygen to the cells effectively and iron is getting stuck in tissues, or there's a lot of glutamate and pesticides and sprays, or dopamine, or the list goes on. And really the environment is what stimulates the mast cells, and the mast cells stimulate the HPA axis. So why am I going into this specifically? Well, because if you look at just a saliva sample and you measure, okay, the free fraction that represents 1 to 5% is really, really high for cortisol. So what's the deferred suggestion? Let's get you to take some phosphatidylserine, because that's going to calm down your cortisol, and we'll have you take that at nighttime. And ultimately, it's not addressing all of the factors that stimulate your mast cells. And that goes beyond stress. In fact, I'll create an argument that the number one stressor in the body is the fact that your body is making free radicals. Your cells are not respiring effectively. And if you didn't catch my first masterclass, we can post a link in the replay to the video. When you watch this video, we'll have it listed in our YouTube account. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and all our other socials. But in the YouTube channel, it will be unlisted, and in the description of the video, you'll have a link to the first masterclass. And in that first masterclass, basically what I'm saying is the number one biohack is making sure that you are able to harness oxygen effectively. Meaning, if you can deliver oxygen and iron and copper to the different cells and tissues and systems of the body, and you're producing ATP and water, and you have enough bioavailable copper to make sure that you don't produce exhaust, then you're going to have a clean energy, and you're not going to produce a lot of free radicals, and hence you're not going to stimulate your mast cells. However, if that's not happening, you're going to stimulate your mast cells, and that's going to create massive amounts of HPA axis dysfunction. And you can't just look at the free fraction from a saliva sample and saying, yep, it's low, so let's give you licorice, or nope, it's high, let's just give you phosphatidylserine. It's not going to work that way. So, and I'm sorry that I have to do it this way. I don't know why my, let's see if I can maybe try from the beginning and get it working that way. Okay, so let's move forward. Always to have technical glitches. So as far as it seems like it gets to this part here, and then maybe because there's a couple of, all right. So as far as, I want you to check out this free gift. If you go to The Truth About Adrenal Fatigue, there should be a free roadmap. And this really answers the 5 landmines to avoid that makes your exhaustion worse. And it also talks about why doctors don't accept adrenal fatigue as a legitimate diagnosis. But the main summary of this book is it says, no matter how much stress you have in the body, the number one stress in your body is oxidative stress. And that oxidative stress will stimulate your HPA axis, and that will cause massive amounts of cortisol release. And depending on how long it's been going on, will depend on what's going on with your body. So as far as the adrenal saliva test goes, now I want to clarify this, because when we're looking at this particular slide is showing the 4 cortisol readings. So you tend to see the cortisol rhythm where you see the between 6 and 8 o'clock, then you see between 11 and 1 o'clock, then you see between 4 and 5 o'clock, and then you see between 10 and midnight. And this is really one portion of the adrenal saliva index. So in fairness to the companies that sell the adrenal saliva index, they're not just selling typically just the 4 readings. They're also typically including DHEA, DHEAS, fasting insulin, and then usually there's a gliadin, or if you're reacting to gluten, or if you have what your 17-OH progesterone looks like. Those are more helpful for sure. But I'll tell you, when someone DMs me in Facebook and they says, hey, I have this adrenal saliva test, they only show me this diagram. And this diagram, okay, so we see that your morning sample's 14 and the ranges should be 13 to 24. So that's in the normal range. 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock should be between 5 and 10, and at 7, and then it's between 4 and 5. It should be 5 or 3 to 8, and you're at 5 for this person. And then lastly, midnight to 10 o'clock to midnight should be 1 to 4, and they're at 3. And then the total range should be 22 to 46, and they're at 29. That's a normal test as far as this result goes. And sometimes I might see that the first sample is low, or it's low across the board, or it's high across the board, or it's high in one range and low in the others. Either way, it doesn't give me enough insight as to what are the things that are stimulating the mast cells. Why is it in this way? And that's one of the major take homes I want you to take away from this masterclass tonight is the saliva test or the Dutch test or whatever hormone test you're doing answers the question, what? It doesn't answer the question, why. So for example, it's sort of like the thermometer outside. And let's say the thermometer was sub-zero. The thermometer would be the what. The why we would know would be because it's cold outside. The adrenal saliva test is similar in that it's the what. And a lot of clients, I've had a client before that I did a reading for her on her Dutch test, and I explained to her what was going on, and then she wanted to know why. And I explained to her that's where you and I need to talk longer and figure out all the whys. Is it your marriage? Is it your relationships? Is it your job? Is it your family? Is it your home? Is it the Wi-Fi? Is it your iron not moving out of tissues? Is it the fact that you're creating free radicals? Is it your dietary habits? Is it mold exposure? The test isn't telling me that. The test is telling me what your grade is. how your body's adapting. And not only how is your body adapting, it's more how is your HPA axis system adapting. And the majority of the HPA axis system occurs outside of the adrenal glands, meaning when there's problems in pathology, you may see that the HPA axis, the P, is not making as much ACTH to stimulate the adrenals, or the adrenals, instead of making cortisol, are making DHEA, or maybe your body is making more binding proteins so that you don't have a lot of free fraction. That's a really important lesson, because when I tell you about why I like the Dutch test better, you'll see that they show metabolites, meaning we'll see what's going on with all these hormones. Even though the adrenals look like they're normal, how are the hormones playing out? Are you deactivating your cortisol, meaning are you not allowing it to get into the cell? Or it's sort of like spending money. Are you able to, you may be earning an income for the day, but you're not able to access it. Or maybe you're deactivating it, meaning you're not able to actually get it to go to battle. Or maybe your body's clearing too much of it, or it's not clearing enough of it. So suffice it to say, the adrenal saliva test is not going to tell us all the other things that are going on, that especially with this particular test, this test would say, okay, well, you're normal. Nothing looks like it's wrong here. And the person will say, well, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I can't focus, I don't have concentration, I don't lose weight, my libido's off, I have brain fog, I get up in the middle of the night, but my saliva test is normal. It's because the saliva test is not a good indication of what's going on at all of the levels of the body. So the saliva test, what it does is it has value in terms of the circadian rhythm, because our hormones, cortisol wise, is high in the morning, or should be high in the morning, and should double within the first 45 minutes, half hour to full hour when you wake up. And that's another problem with the saliva test. If you have a different shift, you're a third shift worker, or you don't sleep well, or you sleep in longer, and you do your rhythm is different than the rhythm that the saliva test is wanting you to test it. Let's say you do it at 6, and then the next one you do it at 11, you're missing your cortisol awakening response. And again, the saliva test doesn't show you that. So it's another reason why the adrenal saliva tests, in my opinion, suck, because they're not showing you that awakening response. And there's a lot of research that shows for people that are exhausted and burnt out, have a very blunted, very flat, very just flat across the board cortisol awakening response, which you're not going to catch if you're doing your first sample at 6 and then your next one at 11, because it's going to double, or it should double within the first half hour to full hour. You're missing it. Does that make sense? So it does have some value in the sense that it should be higher in the morning, lower at night. But as far as it doesn't show us some of the very key pieces of the puzzle, it's missing what we call the metabolites, which I'll show you some case studies when I show you some of what I like about the Dutch test. It does also give you some misleading results. And then it doesn't show you a lot of the times the sex hormones. Now, you can do a saliva test with different companies and pay extra and get the E1 or your estrogen or your estradiol or estrone. You can see those things, or your progesterone, but you're not going to get the metabolites that you see when you urinate, because the metabolites when you urinate are more available to see all of the different breakdown components. It's kind of like Plinko. I tell people it's like playing Plinko on Price is Right. You can see how the Plinko chips go down the board, and you could see if it's going more one way or more the other way. And typically, if there's oxidative stress and inflammation, your metabolites will go down some wrong way. So again, saliva test is not showing us that. So let's see if I can get this to move forward. So as far as to fairness to the saliva index tests that are out there that I've used in the past, they do show the 4 cortisol rhythms. They show DHEA and DHEAS. They show insulin ×2. So they show your fasting and your non-fasting. They show your 17-OH progesterone, They show your gliadin, which means are you reacting to gluten? And they show you your total salivary secretory IgA, which in English, that means your immune system. A lot of the times, if you're flatlining on your cortisol free fraction, your total secretory IgA can be very low. It means your immune system is depleted. So I very, very rarely see all these markers when someone sends me something, because the doctor, either if it was billing insurance, didn't bill the whole panel because I don't get that they have a stake in the insurance company, and it's like you're billing them directly and it's coming out of their pocket to not put the whole panel on there. That's a whole other story, but I very rarely see these values. Now, like any tool, what I used to do in the past was I used to do the saliva test with all of these markers. I would do a blood test with the fasting insulin and with the cortisol and some other markers. And then I would do the Dutch test. So I would see all the areas. So that's obviously a lot more pricey, but you're also going to see different angles that each one is going to tell you, just like an x-ray. I want an x-ray from the front, the side, the oblique view. When I see your urine, I see your saliva, I see your blood values, I can really get some good insight as to how all of these things are playing out. And that's where you really can get some value. But in and of itself, when you're just looking at the 4 cortisol readings, the morning, the lunchtime, the dinner, and the midnight time, very, very limited with the value that it can give you. And that's why I said it sucks when they're used on their own. So what's the real problem? Well, the real problem is that the adrenal saliva test is very, very reductionistic, and it's treating the what of cortisol, or it's telling you what is cortisol doing, but it's not telling you the why it's doing it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open my presentation now and share with you some slides that I've prepared in advance, so we can see some of the reasons why you get some big mistakes. So this one actually is not the first one I want to show you. This is one that I want to show you. So in this instance, this is a 29-year-old male. And what you're seeing here is you're seeing that their free fraction is in the middle. So it's not low, it's not high, it's somewhere in the middle. I would expect the 29-year-old to actually have it to be a little bit higher, closer to the higher range. They have a little bit of an awakening response. You can see that they have a rhythm. This is the free fraction. So this marker here represents what the saliva test would have given you. And remember, I said, if you're looking at the saliva test, keep in mind it's 1 to 5% of the total cortisol that you produce for that given time period. The total cortisol is right here. So in this instance, I might say, hey, your free fraction looks normal. Your DHEA is actually looking well, but your free fraction looks somewhat normal. So I don't have to give you any support to bump that cortisol level up. And keep in mind, I'll do that short-term wise, but I really want to know what's the stress, what's the mast cell activating variables that is causing the free fraction in this instance to look normal. But if I didn't look at the metabolized cortisol and I was only doing a saliva test, and this was the value that I would be looking at, I would err if I didn't give them some kind of support to say, hey, your HPA axis is really shutting down. Your feedback loops are.
Hey, Dr. Joel, your slide isn't updating.
My slide's not updating.
It's showing the real problem.
Okay. I think I know why. 1 second. If I can go, thank you.
No
So
problem.
I'll go here. All right. Is that better?
Yep.
Are you there?
There you go.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry about that. Thank you. So as far as what I was saying is, when I look at this example of a Dutch test, what I'm circling right here is the free fraction of the hormone. And in this instance, it says it's 128, and the low range would be 75. The high range would be 300. So if I only had this at my disposal, AKA a saliva test would show these ranges, I wouldn't have the amount of free fraction that is available that's showing me that the HPA axis is really shut down. And given that it's not signaling to make a lot of metabolized cortisol, but the free fraction looks like it's normalized. And in this instance, I would want to know, well, why is the HPA axis not producing a lot of cortisol for that given time period, but there's a lot more free fraction available? So the body does a lot of compensatory things. But in this instance, I might want to recommend some supporting nutrients to boost that cortisol, because the free fraction isn't telling me that, but the metabolized is. And you would never get that from a saliva sample alone. But you can also see that the same stimulation that stimulates the HPA axis and the adrenals to make cortisol is still signaling to the different areas in the adrenals to make DHEA. So it's not so much that the pituitary isn't signaling the adrenals, it is. But in this case, it's saying, okay, well, the cortisol is very catabolic and the DHEA is very anabolic. So depending on how long this has been going on for this individual, it's not so much that the HPA axis is down regulating. It's more so that the HPA axis is saying, hey, we don't want to continue to make cortisol to be catabolic and break you down. It's time to build you back up. So that's one of the main reasons why I'm not a big fan of the saliva test, because I would never know that. There's other areas on this test that I would want to go into, but let's see if I can give you another example. This is a 64-year-old female, and you could see sort of the same thing we're seeing here. You're seeing sort of the same concept. I want to show you one that I picked out that's giving you a little bit of a different concept. But this one here, you're seeing that their free fraction is a little bit lower than their metabolized cortisol level. So what this is saying to me is that they're pretty similar in the sense that the free fraction is around 3/4, and so is the metabolized cortisol. But I can see that their sex hormones are low across the board, and so is their DHEA. So this can give me different insights as to why. And what's really important is I want to know, what's the trend? Has this person been getting better recently? Have they been getting worse recently? How long has it been going on? So at the end of the day, if I don't have the metabolized cortisol, the DHEA, and all these other markers to put the free fraction in perspective, then if I only do the saliva test and I base it on those 4 readings, and I say, okay, it's low, let's give you licorice root, or it's high, let's give you phosphatidylserine, I'm missing some major clues of what's going on here. So let's see if I can find you. So here's a perfect example. So this is a 65-year-old male, and you could see that their free fraction is extremely low, extremely low. And this is what the free fraction cortisol graph is showing you. There should be a nice awakening response, and then there should be a steady decline throughout the day. In this case, it's just kind of flatlined through the entire day. You can see that it doesn't really come up, and it just sort of stays flat throughout the whole day. However, their metabolized cortisol is actually very high, right? So if you gave this person licorice root or a glandular, it's going to be detrimental to them because their metabolized cortisol is very high. So their brain is signaling to the adrenals, hey, you got to make a lot of cortisol. We're under stress here. We got to fight the tigers and keep them down. However, this person's body isn't allowing the amount of cortisol that they're producing for the day to be available. What it's doing is it's making more binding protein. So because in order for the free fraction to be free, it's not bound to a protein. In this person's instance, it is bound to a protein. So the body produces more binding proteins so that you can't spend your money, or you can't access you're spending money. I use an example of it. It's a bad joke, but it's sort of like a husband that doesn't pay child support. He makes this money, but he's got to get his wages garnished because he needs to pay for child support. In this instance, is the person is making plenty of cortisol to get them through the day, but they're binding too much of it up, so it's not available. By giving them licorice root and prednisone, or it is not going to fix that. And if we would have just looked at this from a saliva sample, we would have said, oh my gosh, Mr. Jones, your saliva is so low, your free fraction is very low, you're an adrenal failure. And it's not adrenal failure whatsoever. And you could actually see their DHEA is very high, their estrogen is very high. So that if you give them even pregnenolone in this instance, even if you're going about it from a holistic point of view, that pregnenolone very likely is going to aromatize into estrogen. So that's a little bit of a deeper concept, but suffice it to say, you can see why I don't like saliva testing, right? Because you're not going to see that. And I'm not even talking about how estrogen and testosterone is clearing out. Maybe we'll do that on another day. Another example here, this one's the exact opposite now. So if you see here, in this person's instance, their free fraction, 64-year-old female, her free fraction is very high, but her metabolized cortisol is very low. And she's not clearing out a lot of that cortisol. So that could be, again, a hypothyroid issue. That also could be that she's making more of her free fraction available because her HPA axis has been shut down for so long. That they are not making as much binding protein, so that cortisol can't, it's like squeezing the sponge and getting whatever juice you can out of that sponge in order for that person to mount a stress response. So you could see a lot of different patterns, suffice it to say. So these were some of the examples that I wanted to show you today. So let's go back to our presentation. I'll certainly answer questions as we go along here. So let me go back to the presentation. So as far as the problem is we're not really understanding the why, we're just understanding the what. So if you don't know me by now, my name is Dr. Joel Rosen. I help burnt out men and women online get their health back. I have clients all over the world. We have a 60,000 community group on Facebook and 10,000 in our group page. And then we've helped one-on-one over 300 men and women with strategies that we're teaching you. And one of the pivotal tests that we do is that Dutch test. We have a high-ranking podcast and speak at conferences. And ultimately, we use functional genomics, which means DNA, along with your health history, along with functional values in your lab ranges, and really biohacking techniques to get you your health back. So what I wanted to do is this was to show you some case studies. The other part of this presentation is then, okay, well, what then is the best test that you would suggest for hormone function? And again, you could use an adrenal saliva index test if you're using it where you're not just doing the 4 cortisol values, but you're also looking at the DHEA, the DHEAS, the fasting insulin, the non-fasting insulin, whether you're reacting to gluten, and what your secretory IgA is. That's actually a pretty good test if you have the other metabolites from a Dutch test, if you're looking at blood work, if you're looking at genomics. So let me explain what different tests we do to give you the best indication of hormone function. And so again, the number one stressor to the HPA axis, which would cause the sex hormones to decline, and so many anti-aging doctors that give their so-called functional practice support for their health challenges is giving hormones. And if they give hormones, that for men, they'll give them, here, take this testosterone and then take this aromatase inhibitor, so that we don't have to worry about why the aromatase enzyme is upregulated. We'll just give you the fish, and you don't have to worry how to learn how to fish. We'll just give you the fish, and don't worry about the consequences of giving you the actual end result, because will give you something that will block the aromatization or the estrogen production. The reason why testosterone is low in the first place is because the HPA axis is going crazy, because the stress in your body, which is ultimately oxidative stress, and the mast cell activation is causing all of the enzymes to aromatize. So it's a double whammy. You're saying, okay, here, we're just going to put a Band-Aid over the oil light and not change the oil and just kind of assume that it's not a problem. We're just going to give you more hormones. The reason why it's low is because you just happen to have low hormones. You don't have stress, oxidative stress, mast cell activation. And the whole reason that they're low is that you're inflamed, and that's what's causing aromatization. But we'll just give you a pill for that too. It just drives me crazy. So anyways, the best thing to do is to do testing to substantiate your free radicals. So ferritin, transferrin, ceruloplasmin, serum iron, homocysteine, reverse T3, fasting insulin, white blood cells, CRP, uric acid. I can't tell you how many people tell me my CRP and my ESR is normal, so I don't have any inflammation. And you really have to infer inflammatory processes with other markers. I mean, one of the best markers we look at is triglycerides to HDL ratios, or how high your triglycerides are, because ultimately you have a metabolic issue going on. Inflammatory cytokines are really great to substantiate your inflammatory chaos that's going on. Mycotoxin testing, organic acid testing, oxalate testing, those are really great testing to be able to do, to be able to understand what the story is. Though, as far as hormone testing, we like the Dutch test, which I showed you. They have both a complete and a plus test. They also do a cycle mapping, so you could look at female cycle throughout the whole cycle. Blood testing, I've done hormones. It looks at pituitary markers. It looks at the absolute levels of cortisol. You can still look at estrogens and androgens. And then lastly, really looking at the genomics or the DNA and seeing what are all the things that impact your mast cells: iron metabolism, nitric oxide, glutamate, histamines, stimulation of your NADPH enzyme. These are all fancy terms, but if you're not looking at these and you're just expecting the saliva test to tell you your cortisol is low or high, and you're just going to take something to modulate if it's high or raise it if it's low, is not going to fix the problem. It's just not going to do it. So I say the old way of doing things is really just taking supplements or cookie cuttering it, or doing bioidentical hormones, or just taking adrenal supplements, or putting all your eggs in one basket. Whereas the new way is really doing all of the different testing that you should be doing to get the answers. And that will help you optimize your metabolic health. And I tell people, health is a verb. It's not a noun. It's not something you just do one time. And it's really Zen in the art of metabolic function, and really understanding that the only certainty in life is uncertainty. And you don't just take a pill and expect it to fix the problem. You need to know what's causing the stress in your body, what's burning through all your oxygen, and or not even burning, what's demanding you produce a lot of ATP by using your food and your oxygen to combine together, and how can we modulate that so that you can maintain homeostasis and be able to stress your body so that you don't overload it and you're always adapting to all the newer stressors that are coming down your way. And then we teach you about keeping your eye on the control panel. That could be your blood glucose levels, your circadian rhythm levels, some of the markers on the Dutch test, your ferritin, your fasting insulin, and really living in the bell-shaped curve, which means not too little, not too much, and knowing yourself. And if you're more stressed on some days, to push less. If you're a little less stressed, to push more, and being able to really flex into and out of all of that. And that's the way you're going to keep everything recalibrated. So I hope that's helpful. I know I really flew through the very end part of that, but we always offer you the opportunity to get some help, where my team and I has set up a 45-minute time to be able to talk to you to figure out how can you recalibrate your HPA axis. We talk to you about what your biggest challenge are, what you've done up until now, what you've been told, what you haven't been told, what's missing, how it's showing up in your life, what's at stake if you don't get it better, what's your biggest fear? And then on the flip side, what would you be doing differently if you didn't have this problem? And how would that look like, so that by the end of the call, we can give you the ideas of, okay, here's all the things you're missing that you should be doing. Here's all the things that you're doing that you shouldn't be. Here's some additional thought processes that will give you more value, so that by the end of the call, you'll have value whether we decide to work together or not. There's really no obligation to do any continued work with us, but we want you to be serious about showing up for that call. We will make sure that we craft a step-by-step program so that even if we don't do work together, you'll know exactly what your next steps are. And if we do work together, I'll give you down to the dollar what that would look like so that you can produce energy on demand. And it's free. I mean, that's the best part of it. And so you may say, well, why are you doing it for free? Well, bottom line is that our goal is to empower 100 million exhausted, burnt out men and women to get their energy back. And I realize that it has to be one person at a time. You have to have a deep desire to get your health back. You have to know that there's missing puzzle pieces and that you deserve to be healthy, and that you understand that the responsibility falls on you. No one's going to care more about you getting your health back than you. I say I'll care just as much as you, but I'm not going to care more than you. You got to show up, be coachable, know that you're going to do whatever it takes to win. And then that way you get a lot of value for the call, whether we end up doing together work or not. So if that sounds like you, make sure you sign up for the call. Again, you might be wondering why we do it. We do it because it's our mission, and it's also how we build our practice, because we want you to make informed decisions. A lot of clients that we talk to, they've made mistakes. They've seen doctors that have told them that they have the answers, and they've seen this doctor and that doctor. And the biggest feedback I get is, I got a little bit of insight from this person, and this person gave me some insight, but no one really connected the dots. No one really looked at my circadian rhythm. No one looked at my glucose or my ketones. No one looked at my genetic testing. No one looked at my saliva testing, or they only looked at my saliva testing, and they never put all the puzzle pieces together. So if that sounds like you, then there is a link in the chat box, and we'll put a link in the description in this video so you can sign up for that, and we can give you a lot of different support and value. So what I did want to do is let you know that the next week's class is going to be called Stress in the Relationship to Your Excitatory Neurotransmitters and the Ability to Sleep. So we'll be talking about that next time. But for now, if there's any questions, I'd love to open up the form to answer your questions. So Kristen, I know you're always Johnny on the spot here. So you give them a link to our group call and our Facebook page. But if there's any questions, I'd love to be able to, let me exit out of here because I'm not able to see these questions effectively. So let me go back to here and see if we have any questions. So it looks like, Kristen, we don't have questions. So if you have any questions specifically with any of your specific test results, I don't mind attempting to answer those for you. Or if you want to question, well, saliva tests are good. I'd love to hear your feedback if you disagree with some of the things that we said. If you want to know about the genetics and why we do that, or how we look at it differently, it goes so much deeper than MTHFR. If you want to know about why we do the organic acid test, I find that test really great. Or you want to know insight about that organic acid test, then that's also a really good question to ask me. But for the most part, if this made sense to you, then sign up for a call if you're still struggling. And then also what I want you to do is, in the Facebook groups that Kristen gave you the links to, if you can give me questions in there, if you want to know about topics you want me to discuss, or different resources, different supplements, we can have a bunch of different conversations about a bunch of different stuff. So Annette, you have a question here. So and I'm seeing that there might be still on locked trunk. Slides are not within the discussion. Okay, sorry. Annette, I'm a 79-year-old female retired nutritionist. I have a boatload of conditions: chronic Lyme and mold, estrogen dominant, saliva test, heterozygous for I'm assuming MTHFR. So I'm going to show you a diagram. I'm just going to go off script here, and let's see if I can show you a diagram and give you some insight. because I think this might be helpful for you. Certainly sound like you're sophisticated. And so I'm going to share, I'm going to stop my share, and then I'm going to share my screen so that you can see. Let's have you see, I think this is what I want to share with you. So I want to know if you can see this diagram, which is this one right here. So if you can't, Kristen, let me know if they can't. If you can, then great. So what I'll do is I showed you this diagram earlier in terms of the HPA axis and how mast cells end up sitting on the cortisol levels. And I'll just see if this is here. It's showing. Okay, great. So what I tell people is if you've had Lyme disease, then Lyme disease will absolutely stimulate the mast cells and create a cytokine storm. However, what I tell people, the number one thing that you need to focus on more than anything else that ultimately stimulates your mast cells, and I said is the number one stressor in the body, is free radical production. Or a better way of saying it, the number one stressor in the body is you not using oxygen effectively, you not having bioavailable copper, and you not having the ability to get iron out of your tissues. And as a result, that creates oxidation. And when that creates oxidation, it creates free radicals like hydroxyl radicals, peroxynitrite. It creates hydrogen peroxide, superoxides. And what these are all these things here. And what that does is that will create a vicious cycle. Those things stimulate your angiotensin, your renin system, and that's where COVID has been known to sort of use the Trojan horse, if you will, and get into our body. So, and then that's what also creates mast cells and cytokines. So when I read something like what you're telling me is you have a lot of on-roads to your mast cell highway, of which the number one is getting oxygen moving in your tissues so that you're producing ATP and you're not having it stuck and create these radicals. That's number one. And so what would I want to do? I'd want to look at markers like transferrin, iron percent saturation, or just serum iron, hemoglobin, ceruloplasmin, copper to ceruloplasmin ratios, RBC magnesium, vitamin A, vitamin D, zinc. I want to look at all those markers first and then get an insight as to, okay, do we see some challenges here? Then I'd want to look at your genomics and see what are some of the susceptibilities you have. I have a gentleman that we just started talking to who's got Parkinson's, and we see major challenges, not with MTHFR. I mean, yes, but MTHFR is so down the line. MTHFR is important for methylation and energy production and detoxification, but I look at it as it's on the asset side of the balance sheet, and it's like a part-time job. Whereas on the expense side of the balance sheet is cellular respiration and your ability not doing it. And so by taking methylfolate, you're not going to expect that your part-time job at McDonald's is going to pay for your condo downtown. It's just not going to do it. So I hope that's helpful. I don't know if those analogies made sense to you, but I hope that was helpful for you. And I wouldn't get too much more into that. As far as, I don't know if there's any other questions there. Kristen, maybe we can see here if there's other questions. If not, then what I will do is I will definitely make sure that we have part 3 next week. We'll make sure that my team told me that I didn't, in a nice way, that I didn't let you know about it in time. So we'll get that out early so we get more people signing up for this. And I hope that's really helpful for you guys. So what I'll do is I'll look for questions in the chat box. Lori, I think that might have been, no, that was someone else. So Annette, you asked that question. And then Lori, do you get any information on mineral corticoids on the Dutch test? No, you don't. But so when you look at the Dutch test and you see the metabolized cortisol, you see the free fraction of the cortisol, and you see the DHEA, you get a concept as to, because the mineral corticoids would happen in a different region in the adrenal glands, right? It's I don't know if it's the glomerulosa or the reticularis or the different areas, right? So when you look at the DHEA and you look at the metabolized cortisol, you can see if they're synchronized, meaning they're both down regulated, they're both up regulated, or they're one's high, one's low. When you see that pattern, you could infer what's going on with the aldosterone. Although you could test, like that's why I like to be able to put all the puzzle pieces together and say, okay, let's look at the genomics. The genomics is a big indication of that whole renin, angiotensin, ACE enzymes, and then to be able to test aldosterone and then look at the Dutch test and see what the patterns we see, you can infer a lot of things. And then you're looking at maybe even pituitary hormones. You get some more insight on that. So, but no, not the short answer is no, it does not. So as far as that answers your question. But I think that's it, guys. So I hope that's helpful for you. I'll give you a couple more seconds or another minute or so to ask me any questions that you have. And again, I'll just leave this on the screen one more time. This would be the link that you could sign up for. Actually, this was our old class. This would be the link here that you could sign up. And then the other thing is, don't forget to go to our website, The Truth About Adrenal Fatigue, and then there is a roadmap. My suggestion is you can get that. Actually, maybe I'm paused on that. It says your screen sharing is paused. So sorry about that. I'm gonna have to learn how to use my screen sharing a lot better next time. But yeah, so if you go to our website, you'll get our free book here. And then on top of that, if you go to this this clickable site here, you'll have a free breakthrough call. So, and then it looks like I have maybe one more question. Someone asked on Facebook that their AM cortisol is high and their PM is high and testosterone is almost nothing. So I'm assuming that's from a saliva test, because again, the whole point of this test or this presentation was saliva tests suck. And if I don't see the metabolized cortisol, then I am not going to be able to get indications of what's going on. So their AM cortisol is high, their PM is high, and their testosterone is almost nothing. So again, that person, I would be saying, even if it were just a saliva test or it was even a Dutch test, is that they're still under major stress in the body, and the resources are being used towards glucocorticoid production, and as a result, sex hormone function is not a priority. And again, I've explained that before, where when your body has a demand and supply problem, and you're not producing enough supply for your demand, you're not going to be adding another addition to the home. I say, like, if you're a business and you're making more expenses than you are income, then you're not going to worry about adding new things to your business, new assets to your business. Same thing in your body. If your body is not making energy at the level you need to, reproduction is not important. And that shows us that your stress response is prioritized towards glucocorticoid production, which is not androgen production. So that's what's happening. Marcia says that the link isn't working. So Kristen has, try that one there. And yeah, so try that one there and see if that one works. And anyways, guys, I hope that was really helpful. And the other thing I will say is, if you're watching this on the live stream on Facebook, make sure if you want to ask questions that you go and register for the next Zoom class, because that's the benefit of going to the Zoom class, is you get to ask questions in the Zoom class alone, whereas in the broadcast of the Facebook group, you're either watching the replay or you're not really getting access to questions unless our awesome moderator is looking out for that. So anyways, hope that's helpful, guys, and I look forward to our next at Masterclass next week. Hope you guys have a really nice evening, and we will see you next time.